Was Season 3 of The Chosen biblically accurate? The Chosen is a high-quality, gripping portrayal of the life of the apostles of Jesus during the time of Christ's ministry. The show boasts over 100 million viewers and has been translated into 600 different languages. Now, so far, I've reviewed every season of The Chosen here on the Bible Explained, carefully examining the events, themes, and script of the show to see if it actually fits with the accounts given to us in the Bible. I'll provide a link in the description to this video where you can watch my reviews for seasons 1 and 2. In each of those reviews, I found that though many want to unfairly criticize this show, it is actually amazingly accurate, and the only major errors I could find were that of the rearranging of the events of the gospel accounts to take place in a different order than they really happened. But of all the seasons that have been released so far, Season 3 is probably the most controversial, and that is all because of one statement that Jesus made saying that he is the law of Moses. Many of the show's critics have called this statement unbiblical and Mormon in origin. Now, I'm not a Mormon because I'm 100% confident that the Bible does not support Mormon theology. But in this review, I'm not going to ask, does The Chosen agree with Mormonism? I'm going to ask the real question, does The Chosen Season 3 agree with the Bible? So before we jump in, I've got to say that on careful examination, I think that Season 3 was incredibly accurate. So instead of counting everything they got right, which would take me a considerable amount of time, I'm just going to again start the season off with 50 points in the positive, which in our Is It Biblical rating system works out to 100% biblical. Then I'll count off 1 percentage point for each thing they got wrong. They need to get at least a 90 to get an A. So, while Season 3 does continue to excel at accurately portraying the culture, peoples, factions, and atmosphere of the land of Israel during the ministry of Christ, and I mean they do a great job of portraying Jewish, Pharisaical, Zealot, Roman, and Greek mindsets during the first century, it also continues to rearrange events to fit the pacing of the show. To be fair, they do admit from the outset that these events have been reordered, and this is very clear, especially from episodes 5 to 8 in Season 3. Now we'll talk about episode 3, where Jesus is shown saying, I am the law of Moses, in a few moments. But first, let's take a big picture view of the order of events in this season. In episode 1, Jesus, upon delivering the Sermon on the Mount, is portrayed sending his disciples 2 by 2 into the cities of Israel. Then the plot slowly builds until episode 3, where Jesus reads from the book of Isaiah in the synagogue in Nazareth, and the people attempt to kill him for his words. Then, in episode 5, he is found healing the woman with the issue of blood who had touched the hem of his garment, and raising Jairus' daughter from the dead. In the next few episodes, the disciples found that their teaching in the cities of Israel had stirred up strife in the non-Jewish Gentile cities of Decapolis, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So in episode 7, Jesus and his disciples walk to Decapolis to teach, and while they are there, people come to hear Jesus and stay overnight to hear him again. But on the following day, they are hungry, so Jesus feeds the whole multitude by multiplying 5 loaves and 2 fish. Then, on the way back, Jesus sent his disciples ahead of him by boat, and they found themselves in a storm on the water. That's when Jesus showed up, walking on the water, and Peter walked out on the water to meet him. This is the order of events in The Chosen Season 3, but the order of events in the Bible is quite different. Jesus' reading of Isaiah in the Nazarene synagogue and the people's subsequent attempt to kill him seems to have taken place quite a while before the rest of these events, even before the Sermon on the Mount, which was portrayed in the opening scene of Season 3. And then Matthew, Mark, and Luke make it plain that sometime after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus sailed to the region of the Gadarenes, which is just south of Decapolis. On the way there, his ship encountered a storm, and he calmed it by saying, "Peace, and be still." Then, when he arrived at the other side in that region near Decapolis, he met 2 possessed men, and he cast a legion of demons out of them into a herd of swine. When all the swine died, the people of the region demanded that Jesus depart from their land. So he did leave, telling one of the formerly demon-possessed men to go tell those cities about what he'd done for him. Meanwhile, Jesus sailed back across the Sea of Galilee to the region of the Jews in Capernaum. And when people saw his ship coming, they crowded to hear him teach. It was during that teaching when Jesus was approached by Jairus, who requested healing for his daughter, and on his way to Jairus' house, Jesus did heal the woman with the issue of blood. According to Matthew, it was probably after this when Jesus sent his disciples on their missions. Then, sometime after that, he sailed to a desert place where people came to hear him teach. And on that same day, when the evening came, he refused to send the people away to go find food, and he fed all of them, including 5,000 men, by miraculously multiplying those 5 loaves and 2 fishes. At that point, the Jewish people were so amazed at the obviously messianic miracle that they began to speak about taking him and making him king. So Jesus left there in a bit of a hurry to go pray in a mountain and sent the disciples on to Capernaum ahead of him by boat. That night he did walk to them on the water and calm another storm, and Peter did walk out to meet him, but then he sank. That was all in Israel. It wasn't until later in the ministry of Christ when Jesus returned to Decapolis, and this time the people didn't ask him to leave like they had last time, probably because of all of the preaching the former demoniac had been doing in their cities about the power of Christ to heal. On this occasion, multitudes of Gentiles from Decapolis did flock to meet Jesus and stayed with him for 3 days until they ran out of food, and Jesus fed them. This time it was a crowd of 4,000 Gentile men plus women and children, and for them he multiplied 7 loaves and 2 fishes to feed them. So to recap, the sending of the disciples should have taken place after the healing of Jairus' daughter and the woman with the issue of blood. The reading of Christ from the book of Isaiah in Nazareth should have taken place before all of these events. The healing of Jairus' daughter and the woman should have taken place as he returned by ship with his disciples from Gadara near Decapolis. And the show basically mashed the feeding of the 5,000, which actually took place in Israel, and included 5 loaves and 2 fishes with 12 baskets left over, and after which Jesus walked on water, with the feeding of the 4,000, which actually took place in Decapolis, where the show has it, including 7 loaves and 2 fishes with 7 baskets left over, and after which no one tried to make him king, and this event was not followed by him walking on water. Anyway, let me remind you that while all of these events were given out of order in this series, the portrayal of the events themselves was actually really good. I mean, really good, with only a few exceptions that we'll discuss in a moment. You can tell that Dallas Jenkins and his team really did their research and intended to accurately portray the attitudes of the people involved in each event, and to preserve the powerful meaning that is implied by the words of Jesus that can be understood so much better when we grasp the context in which those things were said. So now, let's pick apart a few more details of the season, starting with episode 1. While I loved the portrayal of the Sermon on the Mount, I was also surprised that the context of the sermon was surprisingly left out of the film. In one of Christ's opening statements on the Sermon on the Mount, he made the shocking claim that unless one's righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. This teaching framed the entire sermon, and really the Lord's entire ministry, because he would demonstrate that the Pharisees who appeared righteous to men were not, in fact, actually righteous enough for heaven. They needed salvation too. Righteousness only comes by faith. It seems that The Chosen attempts many times to portray this exact concept, and that's why I found it very strange that this quote was left out of the Sermon on the Mount in the film. Next, in episode 2, Jesus sent his disciples on their missions, splitting them into 6 groups of 2. Now, I've always guessed that Jesus would have made Simon the Zealot, a hater of Roman authority, team up with Matthew the publican, who collected taxes for the Romans. What a perfect match that would have made. We don't know if that's what he did, but I'm really glad that The Chosen portrayed it that way. But Jesus did say one thing in his sending out speech that I feel is worth noting. He told them that they were given authority over demons and sicknesses temporarily for this mission, but that later, someday, they would have the power permanently. This seems very strange. Jesus never told his disciples that the power he gave them was temporary. Jesus gave them power. And that's why when Paul was added as an apostle later, he claimed in the letter to the Corinthians that he had done the works that prove that he was an apostle of Jesus Christ, because Jesus had given his disciples the authority all the way back during his ministry. There's no reason to think that this would have been temporary authority. Plus, in the series, Jesus sent his disciples out to minister while he, prayed a lot, I guess? The show doesn't tell us what he's doing, but he's just not there. However, the Bible does tell us what Jesus was doing while his disciples were out ministering. He told his disciples that they wouldn't finish preaching in every city before he came behind them to preach in those cities as well. The point is that the disciples were going ahead of Christ to prepare the way for him and to take care of the healing part of his ministry so that he could come behind them and teach the people in cities that didn't reject and cast out the disciples. It was an efficient way to reach more people with the gospel of the kingdom in a rather short time, instead of Christ spending all of his time just healing the sick. Later in the episode, Jesus refused to heal one of his disciples, little James, from his limp. This is an incredibly biblical moment in the series because the miracles that Jesus and his apostles did were not meant to benefit the well-being of believers, but instead to provide signs of the truth of their teaching to unbelievers. That's why so many believers were sick and died in the Bible, even though the apostles had the ability to heal them. Because that authority, according to Hebrews 2:4, was given to them as a sign, not as a way to escape sickness and death, which comes to us all eventually. In episode 2, Jesus was shown telling James, "I will heal you. It's only a matter of time." Yes, that is exactly true. All believers will receive healing from all disease. Eventually, we are guaranteed new disease and death-free bodies in the kingdom of God. For that, I'm throwing in a bonus point. And with that, we come now to episode 3, the episode that everyone is in an uproar about. In it, Jesus returned to his hometown of Nazareth and is seen joking with childhood friends and playing sporting games poorly. This kind of bothers some people to see Jesus portrayed very humanly. But don't forget that Hebrews 4:15 tells us that Jesus was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. Jesus purposefully and in obedience to the Father's will limited his access to knowledge of the future in order to live genuinely as a human in all respects, only without the sin of humanity. This is why Luke, when writing of his childhood, tells us that he increased in wisdom and stature. It is impossible for God to increase in wisdom, but Jesus, as God, accessed his divine wisdom only as the Father directed him to, so that he could grow in wisdom like a child. This was directed by the Father because, had he not done this, Jesus would never have really experienced humanity. Jesus genuinely experienced the struggles of learning, growing, and working like any human, but he did so without sin. Jesus chose not to access all of his divine knowledge in order to live as a human man in a genuine sense. So though he didn't make any mistakes, that doesn't mean he couldn't have lost a ball game or joked around with friends about his inability to beat them in sporting events. But then the show portrayed Christ's reading of Isaiah in the synagogue near the end of this episode, and the reaction of the people in his audience was powerfully accurate. They were shocked, correctly guessing that he was claiming to be the Messiah. That's when, in the show, the rabbi of the synagogue claimed that he was a false prophet and was worthy of death according to the law of Moses, to which Jesus replied with the famous line, "I am the law of Moses." Criticism has come against The Chosen for this line because many evangelical Christians are nervous about the show being distributed by Angel Studios, which is an organization run by Mormon people, and because Dallas Jenkins, the creator of the show, who is an evangelical Christian, has refused to call Mormonism a cult or non-Christian. Some have claimed that this line in particular shows that Dallas is inserting Mormon theology into The Chosen, because the Book of Mormon, they say, states that Jesus is the law of Moses, but the Bible doesn't. Now, I can't speak for Dallas Jenkins, nor would I want to do so. I have personally met some of his close associates who are adamant that he is a true and strong Christian, and I can understand why he is reluctant to outright denounce Mormons as non-Christian heretics. Look, for all I know, maybe all of the naysayers are right, and maybe in Season 7 of The Chosen, Dallas will come out as his true Mormon self. Who knows? All I know is that so far the show has not actually taught Mormon theology at all, and I will continue to pore over every episode they produce to applaud the biblical things and denounce the unbiblical ones. I'm really more concerned with the product than the heart of the one producing it, since I can't see Mr. Jenkins' heart. So what I want to know is, would saying, "I am the law of Moses," have been consistent with the facts that we're told about Jesus in the Bible? If so, I'm not going to have a problem with it, even if it was put there to mimic the Book of Mormon. And if not, I'm going to have to reject the line as unbiblical, not as too Mormon. However, before we examine the answer to that question, I think it's helpful to first recognize that the Book of Mormon actually doesn't say that Jesus is the law of Moses. What the Book of Mormon does say in 3 Nephi 15:9 is that Jesus claims, "Behold, I am the law and the light." So we can say at least that what was in the film was not a quotation from the Book of Mormon. If anything, it was just teaching a concept that is found in the Book of Mormon. But wait a minute. Jesus said similar things in the Bible too. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus claimed to be the fulfillment of all of the law and the prophets. And in John 5:46, he told the Pharisees, "Had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me." Moses, who wrote the law as it was delivered to him by God, was actually writing about Jesus, because Jesus is the fulfillment of all of it. In fact, in John chapter 1, Jesus is referred to as the Word, who is God and was made flesh. So it's really not a big stretch to think that Jesus could have made a statement like, "I am the law of Moses," especially if by that he meant that he was what the law of Moses is all about, or that his person is foretold on practically every page of the law of Moses. So we need to examine the context of the statement in the film, which was really very obvious, I think. Jesus was not claiming that he was physically the law of Moses, but that he himself carried the authority of the law of Moses. He was challenged by the synagogue rabbi, suggesting that he had broken the law, and Jesus responded by claiming that it was impossible for him to break the law because he was the one who gave the law. He seems to mean this in the sort of way that a sheriff in an old Western movie would claim, "I am the law in these parts." We know, of course, that a sheriff saying this would be suggesting that he is the authority who decides the law. In the same way, the show seems to suggest that Jesus is the authority who gave the law in the first place. He gave it to Moses. In fact, Dallas Jenkins, in response to critics, reminded his viewers that Charles Spurgeon himself, the great preacher of the 19th century, is quoted as saying, "Jesus is the law incarnate." This statement by Jesus, if taken to mean that he is the authority by which we were given the law of Moses, was actually claiming his own deity, because Moses was given the Ten Commandments by God. Mormons believe that Jesus isn't God, but in this scene, the Chosen seems to teach the exact opposite. However, though this scene was very good in my opinion, the show then portrays the people leading Jesus out to the edge of a cliff to throw him off. But once they get there, they seem calm and orderly, and the rabbi of the synagogue gives Jesus a chance to recant before being shoved over the precipice. Conversely, the Bible portrays this as a raging mob that found the nearest cliff and rushed to thrust him off of it. Casting people off of cliffs was not their official method for the death sentence, and anyone who would be put to death in those days would have had to be put to death quietly, so as not to get the Jewish leaders in trouble with the Romans, who technically didn't allow them to execute people. And also, it would have had to have been done after trial and conviction by the local Sanhedrin Council in Galilee. These people did not expect that they were following the lawful manner of executing someone when they were pushing Jesus off the cliff. They were just in a rage and couldn't think straight. That's what makes Jesus' passing through the midst of them so miraculous. Some have guessed that when he did this, he might have disappeared and become invisible, or maybe he miraculously disguised himself. But I suppose it is possible that he just walked visibly right through them and miraculously no one was able to touch him. But he definitely wasn't given a chance to recant, and the crowd definitely didn't think they were being lawful in pushing him off of a cliff. Now, from what I can see, episodes 4 through 6 were really good, and I have no points to count off for those, so we'll skip forward to episode 7. There, we find a scene where someone told Jesus that a deaf and dumb man was diseased because he was being punished for some sin, and Jesus responded to them saying, "That's not how it works." Well, that is not exactly true. It is accurate to say that not all disease is the result of a specific sin in someone's life, but it's not fair to say that no disease is ever the result of someone's sin. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul told the church in Corinth that many of their number were sick and some had even died because of their attitude toward one another while eating the Lord's Supper. In James chapter 5, verse 15, the scripture suggests that God often heals a person who is sick when they repent of the sin for which God had made them sick. So while this is certainly not always the case for sick individuals, it's also not ruled out entirely either. Then, in episode 8, we get to see a flashback to the Old Testament times during the reign of King David. Here, we see David sitting on a throne next to one of his wives, also sitting on a throne. This is historically inaccurate, though not necessarily unbiblical. Kings at that time did not reign along with their wives. But again, since it's not contrary to the Bible, I'm going to let it slide. Finally, let's talk about the walking on water scene. I can appreciate that the show wanted to give Peter a trial of his faith to prepare him for that moment. In the series, he was questioning why Jesus had allowed his wife to have a miscarriage and was doubting the Lord's love for him. Of course, this detail isn't found in the biblical account, but it's not contrary to the account either. What does, however, seem contrary is when Jesus got in the boat after rescuing Peter in the film, the storm slowly dissipated. But in the Bible, the storm disappeared immediately on Jesus' entrance into the boat, and the disciples looked up to find themselves immediately already at the shore on the other side of the sea. This was such an incredible miracle that everyone on the other side wondered at how they were able to arrive there that quickly. So in the end, I counted 4 points off for the poor ordering of events, and another 4 points off for other moments in the series. That gives us a final total, after adding the bonus point, of 93% biblical. A solid A for Season 3. To Dallas and his team, I say, keep up the good work, and congratulations on your Is It Biblical A. I'll be here to applaud you every time you get it right and correct you where you get it wrong. In my opinion, there's a lot to applaud about The Chosen. What do you think? Have you seen Season 3 of The Chosen? Were you bothered by the statement, "I am the law of Moses" in Episode 3? Do you think I gave the series a fair score for this season? What score would you give it? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, before I go, I want to sincerely thank you for watching this video. If you like this content, don't forget to hit subscribe to support the channel and to see more content like this. And follow The Bible Explained on Facebook at facebook.com/The Bible Explained. I really appreciate the support. Also, I want to remind you that the entire Bible is ultimately about one thing: the redemption of mankind by Jesus Christ. You see, the Bible tells us that all men are sinners, and that we must pay for our sin against God for eternity in hell. That's definitely the bad news. But you see, the Bible is all about this one thing: the good news that Christ died to pay the penalty for our sin on the cross. Since your sin has been paid for by Christ, all that is left for you to do is to turn from your sin and accept His salvation by faith. If you've never accepted this gift of God by faith, won't you do that today? Leave a comment or send me a private message on Facebook, and I'll be happy to talk to you more about having your sins forgiven by Jesus Christ.